Hello everyone, hope all is going well. We are back with another one of our what's new and improved inside Bitwig Studio. And this time we are talking about the update from version 2.2 to version 2.3. And I always say these things at the beginning of the video just so that you're aware of how I'm going to come at it. There will be some opinion, that's always unavoidable. And I basically sort the order of what we're covering based on how much I personally think I would use that new feature or that update to the program. And for anybody out there, when you're judging the relative strength or weakness of an update, there is no objective way to do that. It just comes down to how much you think you're going to use it. So for a lot of people, this version 2.3, this update is a pretty major one because at least one thing is something that everybody is probably going to use. If you work with audio clips, if you work with audio samples, the new stretch options are things that you will work with every day. I think in the past with some of the updates, with going to version 2.0, only if you're like a hardcore like modulation nerd, and I mean that in a good way, are you going to maybe be diving in and using that stuff on a regular basis? Like, I don't really use it on a regular basis, with the exception of a couple modulators. I wish I would, and I know that they can be applied to probably any style of music. It's just not something I do for whatever reason, right? And that may be the case for you. It may not be. With another update, it was a lot of like modular synthesizer type integration. Like, I don't have a modular synthesizer. I don't ever plan on having a modular synthesizer. So that update does very little for me personally. But this update in 2.3, really, I think for everybody, there are some features and some things in here that are not only really easy to wrap your head around, but are things that you're probably going to end up using. So without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with just a couple of very quick administrative updates. Some amendments have been made to the manual, and when you bring up the manual and you come to the index, you can go right to updates in 2.3, and then it will route you to those sections that correspond with the updates. The one that was most interesting for me to read was actually going and looking at the voice stack modulator and understanding what those different modes do or how they operate, because that wasn't something that I could figure out intuitively. When it comes to the documentation on the phase 4, it's not very specific, and it's not really it'll get you started, but it's not gonna allow you to master the instrument. So if you want more information on that particular device, you can go into the help, you can click here on phase 4, and that's going to bring you to a page all about the quote unquote phase 4 story, where Bitwig really went above and beyond in this case to talk about this new device, give you some audio examples, give you a lot of picture examples. And I think that's really useful, especially because of all the devices, this is the most complicated one that they've come out with. Maybe you could argue the Tree Monster, but the Tree Monster is not really something you're using every day as like a real utility device. So definitely check this out. They've also put a couple more updates onto the What's New in version 2 page. What's probably most interesting for most of you will be to check out the Z-Plane Elastic website, where you can see all of the other companies and software that use these dedicated stretching algorithms, including Ableton Live. You have FL Studio in here, Sequoia, Native Instruments with Contact and Tractor, Cubase, what have you. So for people who were like on the fence about jumping to Bitwig because they weren't particularly happy with the internal stretching, you now have what's basically in all the other DAWs out there. So there you go. This is just some of the administrative updates, and now we'll actually jump inside the program and get started on what's new in 2.3. Whenever I do one of these point updates, the first thing I always look for is what's been added to the packages. So what's been added to the sample library and what's been added to the preset library. And with this update, a lot's been added to the preset library, but it's pretty much specific to what's going on with the phase 4. So if I go in here, select Bitwig, and go into the preset section and go to the 2 times tab, Okay, this just indicates to me that the preset has been made in version 2, in any of the versions of version 2, assuming the person's tagged it correctly. And then I could go further and I could obviously choose the device that I want, and we'll go down and see that for the phase 4, over 100 presets have been added. With the polysynth, despite the fact that there was a big update to it, only 83 presets were made for version 2, which is still a lot. I'm not complaining about it. But if we go into the phase 4, you'll see some new names here popping up, which is pretty cool. So some of this guy's presets, and I think these are the only things he's made presets for. I don't think he's done it for any other instrument. Let's just, yeah, you can see 50 in total there. Some of his are very good. Let's see if we can find one that's interesting for you guys to just get a quick listen to it. Some of these I've messed with. Right, so that's kind of cool. You can go through and listen to some of his. Let's try this one. Gotta go a little bit faster. And I think you guys all know what I'm going to complain about. It's just that like Bitwig needs to have more options in their reverb, because anytime you listen to a preset in Bitwig and it has that reverb, it sounds like exactly the same. And it's not necessarily a bad sound. It's just you'd like to kind of have some more options. Another one I really like is this guy here. He's made 77 presets in total, including 21 for the polysynth and a couple things for the sampler as well as for the amp. But some of his are very good too. If I could find the one that I really like, I think it's called Runner Drone. Let's go down one octave. Like I can just click and it just mess with stuff. So some of his have been really cool. This guy as well. There are a couple in here that I really like. They have some interesting names to them. I think that I went further and clicked on synth. Let's see. This one might be interesting. Let's go up an octave, sorry. Let's try this one. Let's try this one, sorry. This one's interesting. I really like that one there. Sorry for my keyboard playing. The microphone is right in front of me. But in general, I just like to kind of point your attention to the presets, because this would be the one area where if I was like putting pressure on the Bitwig team, I would put pressure on them, because there are so many really cool and unique containers and a lot of potential to make really cool like effects and effect combinations. But when you look at presets in general, there are certain areas where like it's just really lacking. So if we go back out of here and just kind of go to any category, any device, any of these things, we can see that in the case of the instrument layer with version 2, there are only 35 in total presets that have been made. And that's still good. It's better than none, but I would like to see more than that. Only 30 chains, nothing for the effect layer. And granted, if we went out of this and went to any tag, we're going to see that there's a lot more options usually. But especially when it comes to things like these containers, I would just like to see more options in general, just so that we can have more things to play with. But, you know, that's just a personal deal there. So that's what's been added to the presets. In terms of the packages, I think they only kind of threw a couple things in to the pianos. So there's a grand piano and a grand piano light. They might have added more samples or taken some away. But in terms of just what you're used to seeing, I don't think there's a whole lot more that's been added. I would like more kind of organic sounds personally, just so that There's more variety, things to choose from, and there's things that within the program you're going to have a tough time making. But for the most part, my guess is that big update will come whenever it goes to like a version 3, or maybe if it gets to like a 0.5, something like that, they'll readdress the package content and give you a little bit more in your sample library. All right, cool. For me, the real big update in 2.3 is all that's been done when it comes to stretching your audio events. Now, we don't have time to go through every single feature, every single thing. So we're just going to do kind of like a quick example and listen to these different modes on different sources of audio. Now, the Bitwig ones, Stretch HD, they've also added Slice and Cyclic. There's nothing wrong with these at all. And in fact, if you've been working with Bitwig since version 1, you found a way to make this work. Sometimes you maybe can't push as far as you normally would if you're adjusting tempo, because it's just not good. It's going to kind of break apart, where maybe the elastic ones are going to be a bit more transparent and can be a bit more usable. But you can certainly use Bitwig stretching modes to your advantage. We just have more options now. It's not like we're eliminating past options. It's just more options, and that's great for the user. So I'm glad that they've kept in the original modes, and I'm also glad that they've even added some more features to those as well, which we will be getting to. One other thing to note before we do the example is that if you want to, you can go into your settings behavior and change your default stretch mode. I've been working with the program from the beginning. I'm fine with leaving it as is, especially because after I bounce something, I don't really do a whole lot of glitch music. I'm not taking my bounces and then like chopping them up and stretching and pulling and adjusting the audio. But for some of you who do that, you may want to go in here and actually use one of the elastic modes. But for me, I'm totally fine just leaving this as is. So here's our little loop. It's kind of a mess, but it's just for the sake of going into these individually and listening to the different modes. Okay, so if we start out here, we can go ahead and just pull the tempo down. Right now, everything is in its default stretch state, which is stretch, grain size at medium, kind of like a crossfade between the two. And then for our transient selection, we have like soft, trying to get a little bit smoother. Really, we'll hear how this is affected as we go down. So now the stretch mode is working, whereas before it really wasn't. It was basically in raw mode. You can hear when the drums start to break up. It's already happening. We'll stop it there. This is pretty far. We're going really into more of a category of special effect here, so maybe I should bump it up a little bit and try to go for transparency. So here we have the drums. In our normal stretch mode, we can, listen to where it's trying to get these transients. Do we want harder transients? This is usually the way I work with a drum loop if I'm doing something, so that's just to show you guys. You can hear how much it's pushing and pulling on it. Let's try to get a little bit of bounce or swing. Instead of using onsets, set a set rate. That sounds okay. Not a big fan of that. As a special effect, that's pretty cool. Make sure that just whatever's happening on the quarter note really gets that transient popping through. Tough call. We can move on to Stretch HD. See, it sounds a little smoother. Again, I'd have a tough time choosing between those two. All right, moving on to slices. As you can see, slices audio in chunks using various methods. That's real specific. This just kind of is more of a special effect. You can hear this sounds quite good. And here we see the first instance of a formant shift. And this is something you're just gonna have to kind of listen to on your own. So if we were to adjust the pitch on this, let's actually go down. Formant might help us a little bit make that sound a bit better, depending on which way we go. Like that sounds pretty cool. Do a little more of a ringy here. Hear that ring. Yeah, either way. This is where it gets fun to experiment. We can go back to original. Actually, sounds almost better. Doesn't work with everything else. But I think here it fell. Alright, so another mode. You can kind of read through these on your own as well. Moving on. Very easy to work with, just a few options. Sounds pretty cool. Definitely useful for a special effect. Not really appropriate for drums, but this might be appropriate, and you can automate this as well. You can access it inside of the audio clip. If you want to draw things around, you can definitely do that. This one would be more appropriate as a special effect, actually maybe on that uplifter. But moving right along. With these elastic modes, you just kind of can hear them. And you will want to play with pitch as well. And later on, we might go back to 174 and see what happens when we play with pitch in the elastic mode. So this one sounds pretty good. This is the original. Does a very good job. That's just the regular. And just like in Ableton Live, when they had the Pro mode, I was never particularly good at dialing anything in. So, you know, take it or leave it. So you can read what this says here. Format envelope resolution defines the resolution of the spectral envelope used for formant shifting. Smaller values are suited to high-pitched sounds and vice versa. This is kind of full range, so I think the winner, if we were to have to pick something, would be to just go straight elastic here for the drum loop. And we'll do the same thing here on these drums. Although it's possible Elastic Pro might work since it's more high frequency content in this one. That sounds pretty good. Let's go to the uplifter. And we'll loop it around here. And we'll play with everything else. The one I thought that might be fun. This one, right? No. Maybe it's this one. I'm gonna have to listen to it on its own, actually. Yep, that's what I wanted. So I'm gonna go in here on the format. I'm gonna take it and just go wild. Was this that in context? We can go back to this transition, and this one's a little bit different. This one we might use the Elastic Pro on because it's just high frequency content. You can go up to 512. I take it back, it's not just high frequency content, but this sounds kind of cool in and of itself. Kind of like that. Yeah, that works really well, doesn't it? maybe a little harsh. Okay, that works. Let's take a listen to this guy. And this one, let's see, what do we want to try? Let's maybe play with the cyclic. It's actually slow. This is what it was before, although we still do have the cyclic mode turned on, but it shouldn't really be making too big of a difference because we're not pushing the tempo or the pitch. Let's play with pitch. Let's just listen to the different modes here, and we'll go double. Well, we'll leave it here. So definitely it sounds best there in this case. Let's play with some of these other new ones. Not too great, but a special effect, right? Should be much smoother here. Now let's compare it to what we would normally get with Stretch or Stretch HD. And I know I could be moving other things around. I'd probably turn off this right there. Right, you can definitely hear that difference. Again, kind of a special effect. It's like tone shaping without EQ. But we'll go and now drop it back to... bass one is going to be the toughest because there's just so much going on. I kind of know what I'd already want, and it's probably going to be just elastic. We'll hear what it's doing. And again, in this example, I'm kind of going for smoothness, and I'm going with the new thing so you guys can get a feel for it. So we'll take this up to 174. And now we'll take it back down. So there you go. I'll leave it to you to experiment a little bit more, but hopefully that's at least a pretty good practical example of working with some of the new stretch modes. There's really no reason to like do tons and tons of study on it from like the technical side, just a lot of reading. You have to experiment in each and every case. And like you saw there, I've worked with Ableton Live before, so I do kind of know what modes I like, at least in terms of what goes on with the elastic. So that's kind of maybe why I made those decisions a bit quicker. But for those of you who are new, take your time, experiment, have lots of fun with it. One other quick thing I should mention with the stretching is that they have added kind of a bit of a color feedback if you're going to go into an audio clip and kind of stretch things so that the tempo is different over time. So I'll just go in and explain this to you, how this would work. Let's just use one of the new ones just for the sake of it. Let's use the elastic regular here. And this is what this loop sounds like. I'm going to consolidate it right away. just so I can pull this out further. And now in stretch mode, let's go ahead and let's change this. Bring it down a little bit. What I can do is I could pull this out further. And you see this color at the bottom? I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna add another marker. And now you can see it kind of goes blue when it's going faster than the original. And it goes a darker shade of red when it's going slower. So this is gonna be closer to the original right here. And then it slows way down. The other thing that I like to do in these cases is to actually like split it at these points. And the reason for that is we could then play with the pitch independently. So I could take this one. So it's a little bit silly an example, and I actually really don't go in and do this stuff very often, but I just wanted to show you that because it's kind of cool and it's useful visual feedback, which is something that Bitwig normally does quite well. On now to the new instrument device that's been added in 2.3, the Phase 4. We already have the FM4, but I think if you're anything like me, it's really only usable as like a sub layer. It's good for sub basses. Those two things is what I mostly use it for. Other than that, on its own, it doesn't sound particularly good. The Phase 4 is quite a bit different in that it does sound decent on its own, but I've noticed that it still sounds kind of like the polysynth. Now, don't jump on me for that. It is using still more or less kind of like the same audio engine for things like the filters. I assume the same thing is true for drive, same thing is true for feedback, and even when it comes down to it, like the basic oscillator shapes. Not a bad thing at all. It still sounds really good, and you can do a lot more in terms of like overtone shaping and harmonic shaping with this instrument than you could do with the polysynth. Now, we're going to have more of a dedicated video about this guy later on, just a separate video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. The one or two instruments that you'd want to compare this to is you could compare this instrument with presets and stuff to Dext, which is a DX7 emulator. And if you're loading up presets in the Phase 4, go ahead and turn off all of the additional effects so you can kind of compare sound engines. Likewise, you could use Arturia's DX7 and do the same thing. Turn off the effects on both units and you can kind of do an A-B comparison. I loaded up a string patch in the Phase 4 that kept the Bitwig effects, and I loaded up a string patch on the Arturia DX7 and kept all the effects, and it was relatively similar. I mean, I was very impressed by the Phase 4, and obviously you can turn off, you know, for example, the reverb in here and throw on like a Valhalla or like a Lexicon type deal, and you're really in great shape. So definitely a usable instrument that's going to be able to recreate a lot of sounds, bell sounds, brass sounds, whatever, and kind of get you a little bit of that early digital synthesizer era vibe, but still not thin, right? Like it's not going to be as thin as some of those sound because you can still stack voices, you can add amplifiers, distortion, all that sort of stuff in addition to the Phase 4. So all four of these guys, these are like your oscillators. We'll just use that term now. I can turn off the other three and just be left with one. I can take the shape down and we're basically left with a sine wave at this point. Adjust the amplitude envelope. One cool thing right off the bat I can do, I'm going to turn mod down for now, is I can do a little offset stereo detune. Get something kind of stereo happening. And let's add the spectrum on instead of going out to the expanded view because we're going to be looking at that in the next section. So instead I'll take the spectrum analyzer and we will pop that guy out so we can take a look and see. All right, if I go to shape, what we're getting is something a lot closer to a sawtooth wave. But in addition, I have some other options here for performance that's going to change this balance. So that will be good. I could also adjust the phase of this if I wanted to do that, but in this case, I'm not going to really worry about it. When I go in and I select mod, this is where you're doing more of your classic like FM, or you could also call it like phase modulation, phase distortion, what have you. So we're going to get even richer overtones here. So I'm going to drop an octave. And you can see what happens there. Now, just like we would do with something FM, I can go in and I can adjust the ratio. So if I go 1 to 2, it's actually going to push some stuff down here. Or if I go 2 to 1, it's going to push more stuff up here. So in this case, I like the 1 to 2. Now I could go in and work with my filter like I normally would. I could use this on things like mod, on shape, on anything. And if we had other ones of these going, we could kind of set this all relative. So if we had B in as well, this would be changing the shape knot. So we can listen to this. This would be a cool thing. We could do this, and in this case, we could kind of do this in either location. It's not going as much as I'd wanted to, so. We could also use something from the amplitude loop. I'm just having a lot of fun playing here, but I might use an LFO on that. Or one other thing you're going to commonly do in this instrument is you're going to want more envelopes. So I could go in here and I could add any kind of envelope that I want. We'll just go in with the ADSR in this case. And I'm going to force the shape to move. Too much going on there. So we could spend tons and tons of time playing with this. That's not really the point of this video. As you could tell, I could easily get engaged in a Phase 4 sound design session, and we will go through and talk about how you could use these other guys in tandem. I guess the last thing I should note is that I can still push this harder. And again, this is more of like your classic FM4 style matrix in here. So if we had B turned on, and if we just left B as it is, like let's actually take this up to a 4-to-1. Not going to hear any sound, but we're going to drive this in. I still need to experiment more with this just so I really know what I'm doing. Because you can tell sometimes I'm doing things that's not having a sound change, and I'm being totally honest with you guys about that. That's interesting. All right, let's go ahead and just listen to a couple of presets here for the Phase 4 before moving on. And again, we will be doing a whole video series on this, so that was really just a little bit of an experiment session. We'll go in and we'll grab some strings. Was it FM strings that I thought was actually pretty well done? Yep. Let's go ahead and listen to Fray. Pretty cool. Ambient strings. Also very well done. And again, there's going to be some really nice bass sounds in here, some really nice piano sounds, and also, as you can tell, a lot of pads have been created for this guy. All right, so we'll leave it at that for now. I hope you guys are excited. That's really the teaser. The main course will be a video probably coming out in a month or so. Moving on to voice stacking and the voice stack modulator. So normally when we think about voice stacking in a synthesizer, we associate it with thickening, with widening, with spreading. And it's usually very much specific to pitch and to detuning. And inside of Bitwig Studio, we're going to find that we have these voicing stack options on a few of the instruments, on the polysynth, on the FM4, on the Phase 4, and on the sampler. Now, I'm specifically highlighting the polysynth so that I can kind of just give you a little bit of a comparison here. So right now, we currently have just a sawtooth wave playing. And we can see that like so. Let me turn off the like reset phase button here. And normally when we stack voices, we're doing it specific in the oscillator section. And when we adjust the unison spread, we're changing the pitch on each of those voices ever so slightly, a little bit of randomization to get that widening sound. But right now with this all the way down to 0, if I stack voices, all we're really doing is playing a little bit with the phase of these sawtooth waves. And if I hit the retrigger, it's going to basically, I don't actually know what this is referring to, but what it does is it resets the phase so that everything starts exactly the same way. So as I go up, we get more variation. And you can hear that. But when I turn this on, all we're left with is just a louder sawtooth wave. All right, we haven't detuned in any way, shape, or form. That's what we use the unison for, right? So if I go in and start to put a little bit of unison spread on, we see those interactions there of those slightly different pitches. And when we turn this off, we get the double, if you will. We get both the phase offsets and also a little bit of detuning. And this is why it's like very specific to why you get that kind of like pew sound when you turn this on, because it initially starts with them all triggering exactly the same, but then immediately they start to go out of phase with each other. If we use a lot. Right, you see that adjustment compared to immediately it just kind of being detuned. So that's how that's working. And if you think about an instrument like Spire, for example, the voice stacking in there is very much like integral to the sound of that instrument. And they even have specific presets you can use. So with those voice stacks, they will take one of those voices and let's say you're using like the minor 7th preset and, you know, actually literally repitch some of those voices so that you get the sound of a minor 7th using the semitone, you know, whatever that exact sequence is, you know, a 3rd, a 5th. Minor 7th, etc., etc., etc. there. Now, inside of the polysynth here, and this is also where you have to be careful, realize that this is not going to necessarily correspond to what you are doing with this. Not all the time. If you bring up an oscilloscope, you'll see that it's identical, but here it won't be. So if I start to take the stack here and I increase it, we are actually doing exactly what we just did here. It's just not showing up. And then if I go and I use the stack spread modulator, and sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. I don't really know exactly why. I'm sure there's a reason for it. But if I take this and I put it onto pitch, what it's actually going to do is it's going to take all of these guys and then like slightly change the value. All right, in kind of like an average form. So I'll just show you this on something like pitch. It's really funny because you can see what it's showing us up here, but if we bring in an oscilloscope, it's going to look very different in the oscilloscope. And we'll just kind of go over so I can see it. Sorry. Don't know what I'm doing. Got to get this scale. Right, you see what's going on in here as compared to what we're looking at there. So don't let your eyes deceive you. Always use your ears first. Good chance to bring up that lesson. Kind of annoying. It would be nice to actually see what's going on up here, but not too important for our sake. We could do the same thing with shape. It's not really making much of a sound difference, though, which is kind of odd. Let's try it again. And this is where it's going to require some experimentation because I would expect to hear much more of a sound difference there, but we're not. And there's probably a reason for it. It's because it's trying to average these out. And so it's just kind of bringing them all back to a sawtooth wave. No problem. Here's where Bitwig's voice stacking is really interesting. And this is the major takeaway from Bitwig's take on voice stacking, which is really unique and really, really cool, is that it's less of just a stereotypical spreading and thickening, and it's more of a layering. Because I could take each of these voices and I can do something totally different with them. And remember, this, like, let's say we had we had 2 here and we had 5 here, we would be using up a grand total of 10 voices. And if we're actually bringing in more voices here, this is what you would call like a duplication of everything that's going on inside of the instrument to begin with. So if we already are stacking voices, it's going to be even more extreme, as you can hear. And now it's going to get even more. So let's say I want to take voice number 2 and I want the pitch of that to be, I don't know, let's say like up 3. We can listen to this. 1, 2, and 3. You can hear it kind of locks in there. Let's take 3 and we're going to take that one up 7. And once you get past that 7 point, it's not making a difference. So we have more of like a minor vibe going on there. I could take this up to 4 and we'll get more of a major vibe. You can start to hear it become more like a major triad. So these are just some fun things you can do. Why don't we take voice number 4 and let's take that and let's make it so that it's totally a sub. And one of the things to really keep in mind here that's kind of annoying is that you can't like isolate out the view on what you're doing on each voice. So when we hit it and we see that blue icon coming up, it's really only going like a fifth of the way around because it's trying to take into account the average of all 5 of these voices that are being used. Again, you cannot let your eyes deceive you here. So let's take voice 4. Let's actually take voice 5. We're going to do a lot of different things with it. And here's where you kind of get the stacking principle. Some of the things that don't really seem to work are things like pitch. It seems to take everything and move the pitch. So I've really had like no luck with that, to be honest with you guys. But I don't know. There's supposedly some views in the voice stacking modulator that are supposed to work better with lists, but so far, no luck for me on that front. And here's a real obvious way you can hear what's going on. And same thing will work on your effects as well. So if we go in here and we like add a distortion, we can set it up so that the distortion is really only going to work on like one voice. We'll use this one. You hear that like, and that should be specific to voice 5. So it does require a little bit of experimentation. It doesn't always work maybe exactly how you think it would work, but what it does give you the ability to do is to, like, let's say you're just working with 2 voices. This is what I would encourage you to do at the start. You know, don't use any unison here. Just use 2 voices and try to make as opposing sounds as you possibly can with voice 1 and voice 2, and that will kind of let you get a better feel for like what really is responding and what isn't. So something to experiment with. It has a ton of potential, and I feel like they could do even more with it and probably will. So in a second, we're going to get into the voice stacking modulator. I'm just going to tell you where maybe it gives you a little more freedom and flexibility than this version up here that's synced in with the instrument. Moving on to the voice stack modulator. This is the one instance where I will encourage you to consult the manual just to read those different modes. I'll talk about them briefly here, but I think a lot of this requires some experimentation to hear what it is that's going on. Just reading it really doesn't do a whole lot for you. So if I take the voice stack modulator, and if I don't have an instrument or a device using voice stacking and taking advantage of it, it's not going to work. So if I go in here and I add 2 voices, obviously now we can see that it's working, and I have a variety of different modes. Manual is going to be the one you work with the most probably, but let's go ahead and like set this up so that we're getting something like different from the start. So the first thing I'll do is I'll take voice 2 and I'm going to add some sync to it. I'm going to add a lot of sub to it. I'm going to adjust a few things here. And then I'm going to take voice 1 and I'm going to pan it to the left. I don't really want to do this, but this is just so we can really hear it early on. And I'm going to take voice 2 and I'm going to pan that to the right. Okay, so we can really hear that there's kind of a difference going on there. If I go into my first mode, 0 to 1, things are moving in a unipolar fashion. So they're kind of moving together, but surprisingly, they still do like offset. So if I take this and I go to pitch, you can hear what we're getting there. They're both going up, but it is detuning it. Ever so slightly. Oop, don't want to change the volume. Now, when I go into -1 to 1, this is working the same way that the stack spread would work, in that it's going to kind of move them in opposite directions. So if I go in and I drastically hit on the pitch, one is going to be going way up, one is going to be going way down. You can hear that. So you hear on the left, it's getting lower. On the right, it's getting higher. All right, and I encourage you to go off and obviously do more experimentation with this sort of thing on your own. Just want to use this as, a very basic example. The next is index, and index is supposed to work better with lists. And the thing I keep trying again and again is to get this to work with like the octave, to like shift the octave on one voice from another, but I still haven't been able to get that to work. So we'll go up to 4, and we're gonna try to use the index mode. But it just seems to move them all together. At least that's what it sounds like to me. We'll turn that off actually, and we'll get rid of it. See, they just seem to kind of go together. So I've yet to have any real success with index mode, at least in terms of like adjusting these things, or even if I'm working with them individually. Everything just seems to go together. So I don't know. Maybe it's just not designed to work, and that's fine. It might just be too complicated or confusing. Where you're really going to have fun, though, is in manual mode. And in manual mode, you can expand it out, and you can then send your voices like individually here. So let's send it to something obvious like the degree of flange on these voices. So I'm going to just go ahead and turn this on. We can hear what it does to everybody. Also would like to probably decrease the value on these. Get a little closer to the center. And now I'm going to take this and I'm going to put it onto the mix. And we can now set up so that maybe one voice has it and one voice doesn't. Like that's full blown there on voice number 2. We take it off of voice number 1, or we go like all in on both. And remember that this little display is trying to show us the average value. So if I take both of them and bring it down, it's as if the flanger's not working at all. Now it's going specific to voice 2. Like at 100% or way down, etc. But where this gets really fun and interesting is that you can take something like an LFO, or you can take a random device and you can set it up to work with something inside here. So usually that's going to specifically be this value. So when you use the random or a step sequencer or something like that, you can have these values jumping and changing around in real time, which is awesome. That is the major advantage to working with, at least in my opinion, working with the voice stack as compared to just working with what you have going on up here. Okay, so something I would encourage you to experiment with. I know this isn't the greatest example in the world. I just want you to see how it works and, give you the opportunity to do something with it. But I think that's where I'll be using it the most, is using the voice stack modulator, then taking something like a random or an LFO or a step sequencer and going to town on those voices individually. Obviously, the more voices I add, it's going to set that up for me inside of the modulator there. So again, overall, I think voice stacking and the way Bitwig is approaching it is really, really cool, really unique. And I'm not just saying that, I'm being honest. I really think this is a cool idea. And the fact that you can think about it more in terms of a layering and less of just a classic thickening, because you can always do the classic thickening thing right in here, right from inside the instrument. All right, thanks a lot. The next update is a very small one, but it's useful for a program like this where it encourages so much modulation, and it's something that you already have seen. And that update is just when you hover over a modulation source, you can see the destinations. So with an instrument like this, you kind of have to zoom out far in order to really maybe see all the destinations that things are going to. But it becomes useful if you don't like working in this sort of a fashion where you're over inside of the modulators and you have all of your stuff in here. It's like, oh my gosh, where are all these things going? And we can see, though, now when we just go up and we highlight over these, that we're getting our destinations from here. If something is happening with the voice stacking, those are going to appear in green, as you can see. And if you're doing something with a classic modulator, it's going to appear in blue, as you can see here. So just a very small little workflow speed up that might help you if you're working with presets. You want to know where the destinations are, and you don't like maybe working from a menu. You want to try to keep it as just like in the program as much as possible, not needing to do tons of clicks or right clicks to discover where things are going, which you can always do, right? I can always right click these and see the destinations and clear them or whatever. But definitely something that's interesting and a small feature I just wanted to bring your attention to, because again, these are the little things sometimes that Bitwig does, and they maybe do it first that you end up seeing then in other sort of software. So this is definitely a good one. It's useful for some people. It's not something I might use all that often. I usually end up just going in and looking at things like this and then getting rid of things or adjusting the destinations from here. But definitely something you can look at and potentially use to your advantage. Sticking with aesthetics, we can talk about the new expanded views, and we've already seen some of these. So if you're used to working with Bitwig Studio and you bring a plugin in, you know the way that you bring up that interface is to click this little icon here. Well, now Bitwig has added some expanded views to some of their internal devices, and the ones you're probably going to work with the most are in the instruments that have voice stacking, because you have to click that to bring that up, along with the EQ and the spectrum analyzer. So let's just bring up the EQ, and we'll bring up the EQ5 for this. I'm not sure if it's in the EQ2. Let's take a look at that. Probably doesn't make as much sense to have it in there, and you can see it's not in there. And again, I think my big thing is like you're just going to have to kind of pull up the different devices to see, and you'll know if it's useful or not. But nothing sonically has changed. This is purely just aesthetics, but it is a workflow enhancer. And I think especially with the EQ, if you want something that's a little bit closer to maybe how you would work with like your FabFilter Pro Q, you now have it. You have the expanded view. You can see a lot more that's going on, and you can go in and then make those changes. And if I want to work with it more like I would work with something, you know, a different plugin, I have the ability to now maybe scan and find things a little bit easier. Say, okay, where's something I don't like the sound of? Let's go and cut some of that out, right? These are things you can now do with the EQ. You can pop this view out further. You can also pin it on top if there are other views going on. That would be something you might do with a spectrum analyzer. You can change the size of this. It all updates in real time. Very cool, very useful. Now, if only they would, you know, give us some additional options on our shelves, that would be great. But, you know, one thing at a time, obviously. But this is great. It's not changing the sound of anything, but for those of you who are a little more anal about your EQ and you probably didn't feel like you could do as surgical of things in here as maybe you would want to do, now you will be able to do that and really kind of find and pinpoint in, hone in on those spots, which I think before was kind of a struggle to do. So definitely useful for the EQ, and definitely something that's needed on some of these other instruments so that you can get to the voice stacking options. So there you have it, expanded views. I'm sure there's going to be more of this to come in future updates. I think at the beginning of this video, I talked a bit about the sheer practicality of this update. And with the two new devices, the instrument selector, the effects selector, for me, these are very practical devices that I at least know how I would probably use them. And I've read online and seen some people have other ideas, some very creative ideas, but that's not really how I'm going to use these. So I'll talk about probably the way I would go about working with these. So the instrument selector and the effects selector, they work exactly the same way. Just one is for instruments, one is for effects. And basically the way this works is whatever you have selected in here instrument-wise is the only thing that's technically active and impacting your CPU. So you can click to the next one, the other one deactivates, etc. So if we go in here and we grab a polysynth preset, and we'll just grab 2 different pads, okay? We'll grab a pad from in here. We'll also grab a pad from in the phase 4. Why can I not find pad? There it is. Okay, let's listen to this one. Cool enough. We bring that in. We go into the phase 4. We find some presets for that. Got to select it first. I don't really like that one, honestly. That one's good. Very cool. All right, so as you can tell, we can only select one of these at a time, and only one of these is going to be impacting the CPU. So you have to trust me on that. If you had like 3 or 4 instances of Diva, you know that's going to make a huge difference. If I want to go back to the other one, I select it. Go to this one, select it. And it's a very smooth transition as well, which is something that's very nice. We're not getting any sort of clicking or popping. Haven't really ever tried to use this in like a practical sense. Like, okay, let's say I have a part going and I automate which one is selected. That's not the way I would use it. How would I use this personally? Well, if you're working in a specific genre of music, and I think this is not really a recommendation, this is just kind of the way I go about doing things, is that before I really get started, I'm going to go through a lot of my different synthesizers that I have, including the stuff in Bitwig, and I'm going to try to find some favorite presets for that genre of music, and then specifically for a part. So let's say it's like a string part. I'm going to go through and I'm going to try to find like string patches that I think would sound really good in that genre of music. And what I could use this for is just stack them all up in here and then go in and save this as a preset. Okay, I'm not a big fan of the library still. I have such a tough time working with it. I don't know why, it just doesn't really click for me. But having something like this is great because I can just put all of those in here, all the different synthesizers. And when I find something I really like, I can just drag it and I can pull it out. Okay, and then use it and not have to worry about like this massive CPU hit. Same thing if you're working and you want to like take an instrument and you want to save it for later, you can take it, use the instrument selector, just have this bad boy like deactivated, but you can then move, like let's say your instance of Diva after you've bounced something out, you can move it into here and you can leave this in your project without having to worry about a massive CPU hit and also not taking up tons of space. So the way I used to work in Bitwig version 1 was I'd have 2 projects going. One would basically be the graveyard where I'm just like saving all the old things in case I need to go back and make adjustments. Here, I could kind of all keep it into one, at least with those instruments specifically, and then have another kind of group track of all the MIDI that's going to correspond with it. So if I need to go back and make edits, I can do that very quickly. In the case of the effects selector, I know where I'm going to use this right away is with like chorus plugins and or chorus presets that I really like. That is the particular effect that I tend to hoard plugin wise. I just seem to think that, oh, you throw a chorus on it, it's going to somehow magically make it sound better. If only it worked like that. Yeah, some of you out there probably know what I'm talking about. That doesn't always work. You wish it would. But that's kind of my sweet tooth, if you will, in the plugin market. So I can put all my chorus plugins in here in one of these effect selectors, save that as a preset, bring that preset in anytime I kind of need a chorus, go through and listen to the different options, pick what I like, pull it out, and boom, there you have it. One person said the way that they would probably use it would be like, let's say you had a bunch of hi-hats. You could go in here, put a random modulator on or even a step sequencer, have that working for like which one it's selecting here. And so you could have different hats being played every 16th note or like every bar or something. Really cool idea, something I would have never thought of. So I'm stealing that from somebody online. The other obvious place you could use this is for a live set. If you're going to use Bitwig, instead of having like a million channels and having to worry about arming it to record and all of that, you could just put for your set all of the instruments that you need in Instrument Selector and just go to the different ones each time. Because remember, with instrument selectors, you can still stack all your effects right into the instrument if that's what you want to do. Or you could even put like an instrument layer in here or a chain in here. All those things are totally fair game. It's just that it's going to need an instrument for this one because obviously it's an instrument track. And if you're just doing specific effect stuff, you're going to use the effect layer, the effect selector to do it. So those are your two new devices. I think they have a lot of potential for producers who make a lot of different styles of music, or if you just make a particular style of music. It's never a bad idea to spend a day just going through presets, picking out your favorite ones, throwing them into an instrument selector, and then when you're working on a track or whatever and you don't want to like lose a lot of time, you just pull out your favorites and you pick this sound that's going to work, you bring it into your track, you maybe make some small adjustments to it, and you're off to the races. So those are the two new devices that were added, and to me they're both very practical and things that you can use to hopefully speed up your workflow or just make things a bit more efficient. Time signature changes. This is something that people wanted from the very beginning. It's commonly found in the majority of DAWs out there. It's been added with Bitwig Studio version 2.3. So right now we're going at 4.4, and we're going to look at this on both the timeline view and in the clip view. We're not going to talk about the musical reasons why you would do this. We might save that for other videos, but for now we're just going to go through the nitty gritty how it works. So right now we're in 4.4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So if we want to go up and we want to change the time signature, we want to do this globally, we could do it in a couple ways. One way would be to use the master and to use a clip that's going to launch at 3.4 instead of 4.4. That would be one way to do it. You can also do it up from the top, which is the way I'd probably do it. I can right click, insert time signature change, and just go ahead and change this guy to, let's say, 3.4. And you're going to now see that instead of there being 4 little slots for quarter notes, there are now 3. So if we're playing this back, and we'll just increase the tempo so this goes a little bit faster. 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, and we're waltzing. Okay, so that would be the way you could do it here. If you want to work with polyrhythms, for example, this is a great way to do it. You could take, for example, a clip that's in 4.4, get yourself a clip that's in 3.4 just by clicking over here, and now you have something going in 3.4 with something that is going in 4.4, and you can see that right there and where they actually do come together. All right, so you can see it's very interesting. When we get to the 3.4 part, now we have something 4.4, and this remains here in 3.4. So don't let some of the visuals kind of confuse you a little bit. This is the way it would work if I got rid of this and left things in 4.4, you then see the way that it snaps back up like so that after every 3 bars completes, it kind of starts over. And so what you can do in this instance is if you have stuff going, like even if it's just on quarter notes, for example, or maybe we'll use eighth notes here, because these aren't going to line up the same way every time. If I go in here and I just draw something in with eighth notes, we'll just do this quickly. Right, I could take these guys, go into like the velocity here, and do some sort of a chaos move to it. Get something very, very extreme like that, right? And now if I duplicate this clip over and over, when it resets, it's not going to line up perfectly every time. It takes longer for that to happen. So if these were all duplicated over, you would see that it's going to take every sort of 3 bars for it to restart and have it line up again, as compared to if these were both in 4.4, it's going to line up each and every time after every bar, unless you take everything and do some kind of massive global shift. Oh, sorry about that. I hit my boom. You could also go into the clip launcher, and this is also a fun way to work. You can go and you can make clips, and in this instance, you can go in and change them individually. So we can switch this guy over to 3.4, leave this one in 4.4, and now when we play them, you're going to see how they start to like offset, or they should. Actually, I take that back. I have to get rid of this here. Let me just make sure I've done this correctly. This guy is supposed to be in 3.4, but he actually isn't in 3.4. So I've had some success with this, not a ton. Let's see if it's going to work this time. They're both playing in 4.4. Let's see if I can change this again. I'm not sure why this isn't working. I've had some issues, as you can tell. You can see nothing is changing in here. I think part of it is I need to be in the right view to see it. I don't work in the clip view very often, so that's part of the reason. Because if I wanted this to actually be in 3/4, it wouldn't be that difficult if I just change it myself, but which might be the way I have to do it. You can see, actually, I take that back. This is in 3/4. It's just actually giving us an extra one. So you can see it goes 1, 2, 3, then starts over, and then it's giving us another quarter note. Whereas here, it's going 1, 2, 3, 4. So the way I would really remedy that is just to go in here and change the duration of it. Sorry to do that on the fly like that, guys. I apologize. I should know that in advance. But now you do have those things differently. And now when we play them, we'll see the timing is not lining up here, which is good. And then when you record that to the timeline, it will record that properly. So you could go in and make different clips here if you wanted to do polyrhythms. So that really is the time signature changes in a nutshell. Again, like I said before, it's nothing massive. It's nothing that's going to change your life. Well, it might change your life, but it's simple. It's to the point. I haven't had problems with it. I haven't really had to use it yet, but I'll let you know if there's an issue in the future. As far as I know, it should work without problem. All right, cool. Just a couple more things left. On now to just a couple of final miscellaneous changes. The first is to the drum machine. In the past, you'd have to double click to bring up what was going on in any of these cells. Now, all it takes is a single click and you can open up that cell immediately. Okay, so no more double clicking. You can bring these things in much quicker. That's going to save people some time. The other change that's been made is truly just a preference change. So how you like to work. As it stands right now, if I select a clip, my play marker is going to move along with it. So if I'm going in and editing, as you can see, when I click over here, the playhead gets brought right along with it. If I go to the start of the 5th bar, the playhead goes right along with it. In the preferences now, I do have a setting where if I can find it, let's see, here it is. This is under behavior, selecting clips, time on arranger. If I turn this off, it means that if I go and I click on this clip here and I bring it up, this playhead is not going to move. It is going to require me to click over to bring the playhead where I want it to go. So depending on how you edit, on how you work, that may be something that you want to adjust and change. Truly just comes down to your own preference. I'm fine leaving this as it is because that's how I've been used to working in this program. Okay, so there you have it. That is what is new and improved with Bitwig Studio version 2.3. Hope you've learned something new. Hope this helps you out in some way. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take it easy.